Kia ora tātou katoa. The Bible is a book full of dreams and dreamers, and those trying to keep the lid on dreams and dreamers. Whether it be a song or a so-called prophecy, a baptismal credo, or a rule-breaking egalitarian meal. The Bible is a depository of dreams, of how life might be different, how society and politics might be different. Indeed, how the known world might be different. And such dreams, of course, are a threat to those who are heavily invested in the continuance of the status quo. Consider that song, put on a pregnant Mary's lips, the song we call the Magnificat. It's from Luke 1. The Gospel of Luke Acts was one volume that got split into two due to its length. Luke Acts was written and compiled around 130 CE, much later than originally thought. But the author-editor, commonly called Luke, spliced into his work passages and songs from much earlier times, the Magnificat being one. This seditious little song dates from the earliest days of the post-Easter Jesus groups, and may well be from the community called the Poor, kind of like Life Church, instead called it the Poor, or Anawim, and they were one of the Jesus groups in Jerusalem. The poor were notable in that they shared property in common, which is referenced with some flourishes in Acts 2. It's thought that James, Jesus' biological brother, was the leader of that group. The Magnificat is a song that sings of a divine reversal, of the poor being fed with good things and the rich sent away empty, of the humble, read poor, being lifted up, and the mighty, read powerful, being cast down, of Israel, beaten down by Roman colonization, being freed and restored. And over the centuries since its debut, particularly in places where the powerful and Christianity walk hand in hand, the political potency of that song has been watered down by the likes, for example, of Luke in the 2nd century, and then other later religious commentators. In Luke, the poor might be fed, but it's through the generosity of the rich. The humble might be lifted up, but it will be through cultivating the good, beneficent graces of the mighty. And Israel will be restored and freed. But Israel is now the Messianic Judaism, later called Christianity, aligned with the empire. Rome's the New Jerusalem. You might also want to compare the Magnificat with the book of Psalms, also made for song. The Psalms were written and compiled by a number of authors under the watchful, royal, all-powerful eye, crediting their composition to King David. You will find little in the Psalms about a divine reversal. Kings do not do divine reversals. Kings like things mostly the way they are. Kings like to be in charge and don't take kindly to seditious songs. The Psalms are all about sheltering in the wings of the Almighty, Psalm 91. And while others might fall, you with your faith won't. Walking even through the valley of the shadow of death, the Almighty will protect you, Psalm 23. The Psalms are all about praising a saving God who will rescue you not because you're poor and destitute, but because you, as a good supplicant, cry out for mercy. You're meant to take comfort in the knowledge that God is watching out for you. For God is like a king, benevolent, and ultimately in control. Funny that. The political agenda of the Magnificat is subversion. The political agenda of the Psalms is submission. The book of Psalms is not alone in this. The so-called wisdom literature of Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes follow this royally sanctioned endorsement of the status quo. You won't find anything in those books either about the poor being lifted up and the rich being tossed down. Ecclesiastes, for example, with its non-theistic twist, there's no God mentioned in this book, promotes the acceptance of life as it is. There is a time for everything, but not for the rich to be thrown down, and not for the cries of justice to be heard. It's a time to tear down, says Ecclesiastical 3, and a time to build, which is to be taken personally, not politically. Or maybe it's mandating the construction industry. Interestingly, Shirley Murray's hymn, Our Life Has Its Seasons, while seemingly accepting that there's a time for everything under heaven, subverts it with the refrain that there's never a time to stop believing, never a time for hope to die, never a time to stop loving. And we might want to be explicit about those beliefs, hopes, and loves, tying them into a vision of mutuality and justice and peace. Is there ever a time for those who follow Jesus when one shouldn't be offering good news to the poor, with the poor being the judge of what's good? When captives shouldn't be released, when the blind shouldn't be receiving medical aid, when the oppressed shouldn't have their freedom. And let's not fall, as many have, into the mistaken belief that Jesus and Isaiah before him aren't being political. Isaiah and many of the prophets offer us a different dream than that of compliance and submission to the powerful. In Isaiah 65, our reading today is a case in point. Here is a picture painted of good health care for all. Yes, socialized medicine. A picture of housing, work, and income for all, and not a division of resources where some are systematically privileged and others systematically impoverished. And a picture where difference, whether created by enmity, wealth, race, or species, is not a cosmic divide, but part of a peaceful whole, even though the serpent gets excluded. Even prophets have their blind spots. Isaiah's vision, while not singing a reversal, infers a huge structural readjustment of the economy and political apparatus in order to make this egalitarian, peaceful society happen. He was preaching to his leaders, religious and political, after the return from the Babylonian exile around 538 BCE. As those leaders set about a huge rebuild of cities and towns and infrastructure, dominated no doubt by their equivalent of planners, engineers, and economists, there was that voice of that gadfly, Isaiah, that pain in the proverbial, saying, it's not good enough to just create jobs, create buildings, and create businesses. It's not good enough that we are once again on our own land, practicing our own faith in our own way. It's not good enough to let the so-called natural distinctions between rich and poor, healthy and sick, homed and homeless re-emerge. It's not good enough to treat our fellow Jews who didn't go into captivity differently, or treat those with foreign wives differently, or treat those who aren't Jewish differently. No, to build a new society, we need a big, big vision with room for all, resources for all, hope for all. You see, some who came back from Babylon wanted to express their faith by making rules, having insiders and outsiders. Rules particularly around intermarriage with non-Jews on the outside. Others, like Isaiah, wanted to express their faith by painting a big dream on a big canvas with lots of room for everything and everyone except snakes. One of the more well-known dream speeches is that of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. at Washington in 1963. You will hear in that speech echoes of Isaiah calling his people to a big vision. Every valley, every obstacle will be overcome. And you'll hear in that speech the echo of St. Paul, that there's no slave or free, Jew or Gentile, black or white, we're all one. One humanity, one family under God. And you will hear in that speech echo of the radical egalitarianism of Jesus that we reenact at every communion service, that all can sit down together. Whatever the differences we are born with, or society layered on us, whatever our age, race, sexual orientation, color or creed, you'll hear in that speech the hope in it. And you'll know from our history books and newsreels that that hope came at a cost. Hope, faith, courage. These things are not a strategy, but the inspiration for coming up with strategies. The injustice calls out to us, insisting, haunting, challenging us to respond. So King tells us to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to climb up for freedom together, knowing that all will one day be free. One day when all of God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to hold hands and sing in the words of the old spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Big dreams, big dreamers. This is our faith. This is what our faith calls us to. Blessings to you this week.